So thank you for joining us today, Emily, and then people at the Office of Distance Learning. Today, me and Devin are going to be talking about how to innovate your course with open education resources. And so I'm Lindsay Warden, and I'm the Extended Campus and Distance Services Librarian.
And I'm Devin Soper, the Scholarly Communications Librarian at Georgia Library.
So I wanted to start out and kind of explain why I got interested in OERs and how I came to be kind of a part of this initiative because, you know, usually OERs kind of go with academic publishing and scholarly communication in libraries, but being the distance learning librarian, I had a very unique experience where I was visiting our campuses last summer. And I was in Valencia at this time at our extended campus there. And I met a student who told me they were having trouble, they were struggling in their classes, and they were wondering if the library could help them with their textbook. And they said it was because the shipping fees to ship text overseas and to carry their textbooks around was exorbitant, and they could not even afford what their books were right now. And the more I started talking to students and instructors about the textbook issue, I kind of realized that this wasn't a unique case. This was happening at all of our extended campuses, and when I started talking to online students, I noticed that online students also had the problem. A lot of them didn't have quick access to our bookstores on campus, and so it was even harder for them to get access to textbooks than for students that were studying on campus. And so I sort of felt like that as me as a librarian trying to make sure we're providing equitable access to resources, we offer students on campus course reserves for a number of courses, but the students who are off campus, they don't get that resource. They don't have that sort of availability to fall back on in case they can't afford their textbooks. And so I think that actually OERs and online courses are a really good match, and their initiatives trying to give education for more people, scale it to where it fits everyone, make it more flexible, well, those are things that open education resources are also trying to do as well. And so that's how I got interested in this project, and that's why really I wanted to come and do this presentation for the Office of Distance Learning, and so we could talk about online courses and OERs specifically. So really we're going to start today and talk about 4 things about OERs, and the first thing we're talking about is the benefits of OER, why you should use open education resources in your class. Then Devin's going to talk about how to find open education resources and some of the repositories that are out there. And then he's also going to cover creating open education resources, so how you can actually take different materials and make them your own sort of module. And then we're going to talk a little bit about open education resource support at FSU. So very quickly, I want to go over the definition of OER in case maybe you're not as familiar what is an open education resource, because I do think that there's actually a little bit of confusion about them, because a lot of people think that it just means free. It's just free textbooks, but actually it means much more than that. So an OER, they're teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in public domain or are released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. So they're not only free, but they're actually open. That gives you a lot of freedom with what you can do with them and how you can really make these resources your own for your own course. So there are 5 R's in OER permission. I'm going to go over those pretty quickly. The first one is retain. So this means you have the right to make it your own, control copies of the content, so you can download, you can duplicate, you can store, you can manage. So you can actually own copies. You don't just have to link out to copies like you do with some of the media and resources you would find online. So you have reuse. So the right to use the content in a wide range of ways. So you don't just have to deposit it and just use it just the way it is, but you can actually use it in a class, in a study group. You can post it on your course site. You can use this in a video. There's a lot of different ways that you can use it. So revise. The right to adapt, adjust, modify, or alter the content. So you can translate the content into another language. You can take out part of the content if it isn't applicable to your course. Remix, the right to combine the original or revised content with other material to create something new. So you can create a sort of like mashup of content. And this allows you to take different resources and really make them applicable to what you want to talk about, what's going to support the needs of your course. And then the last one is the redistribute. And so that's the right to share copies of the original content or your revisions and your remixes with others. So you can give the copy of a content to a colleague, somebody else in your department, maybe even your TA, or anybody even out on the internet. So OERs are created with a Creative Commons license, and these licenses provide advanced permissions to use copyrighted material under certain conditions. And this is really important because I think that we all know that copyright and the conditions of copyright law have made using resources in your course pretty confusing, especially with online courses. That's something that I try and definitely think about with faculty a lot, how to streamline this process, how to make this process less confusing for instructors. And I think that with Creative Commons license and with OERs, just sort of being able to feel like you have the freedom to use these resources is a huge benefit to using them in your class. So let's talk a little bit more about the benefits of OERs. And I think that these may not be huge shockers to you as instructors. It's something probably you've heard, it's talked about all the time, but I think that it's really important for us to recognize some of the facts about higher education and about affordability right now. So of course, I think when you're talking to students about OER, there's one huge benefit, and that's that you're going to save students money on course materials. So the price of college textbooks has risen at 300% over the rate of CPI in the last 25 years. So while incomes have stayed the same, textbooks have gone through the roof. And like I said, I don't think that this is really surprising to anybody, but it's definitely a huge issue. So 2 in 3 students report having not purchased a textbook due to high cost. And this is from the student PIRG study, and this is a pretty recent study. So that's over 66% of students have made the decision not to purchase a textbook because they couldn't afford it. So they were behind in the class, and they probably felt like a textbook was actually a hindrance to them instead of a help in their learning process. And less than 1 in 2 students report purchasing current editions of their textbook. So they are forced to make the decision to buy the cheaper, older edition, where usually page numbers don't match, the content can be a little different. This is something especially that we try and teach in libraries about looking at relevancy of content, of revisions, and if a student is already having to buy old editions, make those sort of concessions on their education, I just think that it really ties into the whole information literacy spectrum. So as far as looking at particularly at online students, a lot of online students are going to buy e-textbooks. That's what I've noticed in my experience working with students. But e-textbooks offer limited availability for a cheaper price, forcing most students to purchase a resource they will only have access to for a short time. So I think that there was this idea back in the day that during college you make this great collection of textbooks in your major and you have these old books that you keep forever. Well, if you're making a tough decision financially and you are looking at an e-textbook that's $40 or the regular textbook that's $70, but you only get that e-textbook for 3 months, that's information that just goes away, that you can never reference again. I mean, I think something, being a librarian, this is just an idea I hate, and a lot of students are choosing this option and have to make those hard decisions. And we can't assume that students living abroad or maybe in rural areas have access to bookstores, Amazon Prime, and that means they're forced to pay really high shipping fees and wait long periods before receiving their books. So not only are we asking these students to buy these very expensive textbooks, but then we're putting a burden on top of them because they're studying at a distance and they can't just go to the FSU bookstore. And I think that this is really something we need to think about in online courses as we're trying to make, especially kind of spread online courses, make them even easier for students, and this is a huge step back for students. So OERs improve student learning outcomes. They ensure students can afford their materials. If students don't have a textbook, they're going to fall behind. They're going to feel like they're not part of the conversation. And so Emily said even students that can afford the books will wait to see the syllabus to see if they need the textbook, getting the books late. And this is what happened when I started having my conversations with students overseas. They wouldn't get the textbook. They would wait until they would know if they would need it. And then they'd have to pay $30, $40, $50 in shipping, and it would take weeks to get there. So you can revise materials to address errors and omissions. This is really important because I think that as librarians, when we teach students to look at information critically, we're talking about don't just, look at many sources and use all sorts of perspectives to come to a cohesive sort of decision about the resource. And when people prescribe just one textbook, especially if it's a little outdated, that can make it seem like there's only one source on the topic. So this way you're actually able to revise materials, look at errors, omissions, if there was problems, if there's something else you think should be included that will be helpful for your class, you're able to do that. You can adapt materials to include the local or student context. This is really important, especially I think sort of universities, instructors are trying to think more and more, including about current issues, social responsibility, social engagement in your course, and you're able to sort of remix your content and think about how you want to incorporate new sources, and we have new media as the last point here. This is really important because more and more instructors are using videos, audio, making it a more engaging class, not just very bland sort of readings all the time. And so you're able to take all these different open resources and make them your own and make the course your own, really take ownership of your pedagogy. So sharing course materials with the world. And as an instructor, I think that you are definitely part of this learning community, whether it's the FSU community, the community of your department, but just like the higher education community as a whole. And these textbooks that Devin's going to talk about that you're going to be able to search through and find in the resources, they've been created by other instructors at other institutions and made available to you in your course. And there's something really cool about this open sharing community of instructors who really care about giving students really high quality education. And so it provides more options for teachers and learners. You don't just sort of have this like static choice of a textbook which has been used for 20, 30, 40 years. It demonstrates excellence in teaching and learning. I think that it really shows that you're trying to take your course, your materials a step farther. You're thinking about how to make them your own and also give students sort of an ownership over that too. And you raise the profile of departments and institutions. So if you're putting out open education resources into the landscape, that's really going to make Florida State and your department look like a really special place where instructors really care about their students, because even though it takes some work, I always think it's going to be really worth it and make your course just better and more enjoyable for students.
Okay, thanks very much, Lindsay. So, yeah, my name is Devin Soper. Welcome to the two people who joined us a little bit late. We just covered the benefits of OER and how, just using and creating open educational resources can sort of leverage all of like the vast transformations in education and just information dissemination over the last 30 years. I mean, in a way, it's kind of strange that we would, or it's not advantageous that we would use, old publishing models with people buying, different editions of textbooks and only having limited circulation, when we could leverage the power of the internet and make these things openly available and discoverable online. You're just going to get a far broader readership, help learners and instructors the world over, in addition to gaining all of the other benefits that Lindsay talked about. So moving on from some of the benefits, and we can sort of return to them at the end if there's time for questions. I was just going to cover some really excellent resources that you can use to find open educational resources, and to find different kinds of open educational resources as well. And then we'll talk about creating OER, some of the sort of copyright and licensing considerations to take into account, how those considerations can actually, even though they might seem a little bit complicated at first, how they actually simplify and streamline the process of selecting materials and making them available to students. So we'll talk about that, and then finally a little bit about open education resource support at FSU. So probably the oldest player in this game is MIT. They've had their MIT OpenCourseWare website repository live for a long time now, almost a decade, I think. And basically their vision was similar to what I was just saying. Why should we lock up our syllabi and course outlines and related materials in a course management system where the world can't see it and it's only available to our students? Why not open this stuff up and make it discoverable to everyone so that everyone can see the fantastic teaching that's going on at MIT? And this kind of sparked a bit of a change in how people were thinking about educational resources, and just realizing that they can have tremendous benefit for populations all over the globe, and that is not just a benefit to them, but also a benefit to the instructors who work so hard to create these courses. So MIT OpenCourseWare is a great example of that form of open education, of just even making available syllabi, handouts, readings, and that kind of thing. So I encourage you to check that out. In terms of actually finding open educational resources that are licensed under Creative Commons, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, and why that's so important. But in terms of finding things that you can reuse and that you can be guaranteed you can incorporate into your courses, there are a number of sort of discovery platforms that you can use. I'll just rush through a few of them here. OER Commons is one. They have a good search interface. You can find all sorts of materials in there, from readings to images to video to audio and so on. So it's a good sort of multi-format repository for that. Similarly, the Shareable Online Learning Resources database is a similar idea, mostly populated with open textbooks in this case. The Open Course Library, this is sort of an index and discovery tool for entire open courses writ large. So not just specific resources that you could use, but openly licensed courses, from start to finish, including syllabi, readings, assignments, assessments, and so on. So that's an excellent resource as well. Now, moving away from sort of like the format agnostic platforms, I just wanted to focus specifically on open textbooks because they're really, one of the most advantageous and like easy to use and implement, and also highest impact in terms of the benefits to students. Just relating back to what Lindsay was explaining earlier about the dramatic rise in the cost of textbooks. I mean, the cost has risen about 800% in the last 30 years, but 300% relative to the rate of inflation. Either way, it's crazy, and students feel the brunt of that directly. In many cases, we don't budget for those costs. So there's been most probably of the attention and the momentum in the open educational resource space is happening in the domain of open textbooks. And actually now I'm just going to attempt to application share because I'd like to click around in OpenStax for a moment. It's not essential that we do, so bear with me. It's just loading. Okay, now I'm going to try this web tour thing. Here we go. This is better. So can you all see the website I pulled up? I'll trust that you can. So OpenStax is one of the bigger players in the open. Oh, you can't, Emily? That's too bad. Anyway, OpenStax is. I won't spend too long. I won't belabor it. I just wanted to show you, like, sort of how advanced these resources have become. A few years ago, there was, I don't know, a lot of activity in this space, but there were some missing pieces with respect to open textbooks. So, for instance, like some of the common concerns that instructors would have would be that, either there wasn't an open textbook that was available for the subject that they taught, or there wasn't a whole lot in the way of like review and peer review and sort of like certification and validation of the content. And they wanted to be able to see that other reputable and prestigious researchers in that area had read these books and to see what their thoughts on them were. And also, that in many cases these books used to lack sort of supporting materials that are really valuable to instructors in terms of like how to actually implement a textbook like this in a course format. So, ideas for assessments, slide decks, that kind of thing. In many cases, these books now include all of that. So I'll just maybe take the example of Principles of Economics. You can see many of the titles that they're focused mostly on like first-year entry-level courses, just because those classes tend to be the biggest, and the content tends to vary less from year to year. But nonetheless, looking at Principles of Economics, you can see we can view it online. It's totally mobile optimized, so a student or teacher can read it on their phone or tablet. You can download a PDF copy. You can order a print copy for around $30, so students definitely have the option to do that, and it's very affordable. In this case, you can't download like a Word or like a OpenOffice sort of editable version of the book, but in many cases you can. And that ties back to what Lindsay was saying about the advantages of being able to customize materials and correct errors and omissions and work in local context, which many studies suggest improves learning outcomes. And you can make sort of case studies and examples using examples that your students would be familiar with. I understand that'd be difficult to do in a distance learning context, but nonetheless, that kind of flexibility is there. But you'll see, I'm scrolling down, there's all sorts of instructor resources that come with this book. So we have supplemental tests, PowerPoint slides, assessment bank, and so on. All of the materials that many of the commercial textbook publishers sort of tend to package their books with are now being included with open textbooks as well. So there's been a lot of movement in this space and a lot of effort and really good work to try and bring these textbooks up to speed with best practices and sort of the benchmarks that are set by the more commercial textbook publishers. All right, so OpenStax is a great resource for open textbooks, and it's a really great news story for students and instructors and their departments. I mean, there's more and more stories coming out about instructors who have adopted open textbooks, and you can have a bright line headline in the campus newspaper saying they've saved their students, hundreds of thousands of dollars over just a few years after adopting one of these. So yeah, everyone wins in a way. The only thing is that it does, require some work up front on the part of the instructor to adopt a different textbook and sort of revise their course. But we'll talk a little bit more about ways of supporting that later. So there are a few open textbook libraries. Certainly OpenStax is one. Another huge one is the Open Textbook Library out of University of Michigan, I believe. And they have like a big network of different universities that work with faculty to contribute reviews to their textbooks, again, to ensure that they're validated and that they have some degree of review and prestige. BC Campus also has a great open textbook library. This sort of searches across, includes some titles from OpenStax and the Open Textbook Library. The Orange Grove, this was, it's still available. It's sort of an OER resource repository in Florida. There isn't a whole lot of content in there, and the content's like quite variable. They don't focus, for instance, specifically on textbooks, and they sort of collect a broad range of things. But I do encourage you to check that out if you haven't seen it before. MOOCs, I also wanted to mention, and I think on my application share again, if you might be sick of hearing about MOOCs, or you might not have heard about them before. And I still bump into people who haven't, so I'd like to at least mention them. So MOOCs are massive open online courses. The idea is that all of the materials are openly available, openly licensed, and they run iterations of these courses and make them totally openly available to the world, to anyone who just registers for free on their site. So they can have hundreds, certainly tens of thousands of students in many of these courses, and elite universities are partnering with Coursera and other MOOC platforms in order to take some of their hugely successful courses and put them online and make them available to the world. There's just a vast array of courses, and with that, and each course just consists of a vast array of OER, in many cases that can be openly reused. And some schools are dumping a lot of money into this so that they'll have like 3 cameras in a lecture room, recording a lecture from different angles and things like that, and then putting it on YouTube and under a Creative Commons license. So, even just searching in here, if you find a course that's sort of aligned with some of the teaching that you do, you might be able to find a trove of really high production value resources that you could just reuse. So 2 other platforms in addition to Coursera. One's called Udacity, and another one edX, which was a partnership with Harvard and MIT. Again, encourage you to check those out. All right, so I'm going to move on to a section on creating OER, and particularly we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about copyright concerns, Creative Commons licensing, and why that's an awesome thing. So, as Lindsay, mentioned in her definition of OER at the beginning, OER are typically defined as materials that are either Creative Commons licensed or in the public domain. And so the public domain is a fairly specific legal concept, at least when used in this context. And it refers to everything that's out of copyright, everything for which copyright has already expired. So in the United States, for instance, everything published or created before 1923 is in the public domain. And then there's, a range of other sort of rules and conditions, which we'll look at very briefly. But the point here is that if it's in the public domain, it's not subject to any copyright restrictions, and if it's Creative Commons licensed, then students and teachers have advanced permission to use that content for educational purposes. There are some sort of limitations on using Creative Commons things, but most of them don't, or many of them don't apply in the nonprofit education sector. So they ensure broadest possible dissemination. It's not just that you can reuse it; it's that you can, share it with the world, make it openly available. It minimizes copyright concerns, so that can really streamline your workflow as an instructor. If you need to incorporate a range of materials that are under copyright and it's causing sort of concerns or challenges, there's always the option of looking for a Creative Commons licensed alternative. I realize that may not work in all cases, or in many cases it won't, but nonetheless, it's definitely a worthwhile option to explore, and the library can help with that as well. We'll talk about later. So, just to build on what I was just saying, I kind of view these categories across a spectrum. So you have traditional copyright that is very restrictive. You basically, certainly if you want to make something openly available, in many cases you need to get permission. And then you have Creative Commons licensed, on the other end of the spectrum, you have public domain, which is no restrictions whatsoever. You can use it however you want. And then in between, you have Creative Commons, which, provides broad advanced permission to reuse the work for any number of purposes. But that has four possible requirements that come with that reuse. So, yeah, before I move, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about those four requirements, but just to return to what I was saying about simplifying the workflow for instructors, I think that this infographic is instructive. So this sort of is like a decision tree for whether or not you should use something or could use something in your course. And the first question asked is always, is it old enough to be in the public domain? And before I move on from that, I just wanted to share one thing with you. This is a digital copyright slider. So if you know the publication date of something, then this is an extremely useful resource. It'll tell you whether or not permission is required and all the different conditions. So that's a great resource to use if you're trying to decide that or work through that first decision. And then is it Creative Commons licensed? And if yes, then you can use it. So you can really simplify the number of decisions that you need to make. And really is it public domain? Yes, no. Creative Commons? Yes, no. Those are fairly easy things to decide and ascertain. Then it becomes much more complicated with respect to, does it qualify for an educational exception in the Copyright Act, or, does it qualify as fair use, which is a very subjective thing. we encourage people to exercise their fair use rights, and it's even built into the way that we do course reserves at the library. But nonetheless, it can appear to be, burdensome from the perspective of an instructor who already has, tremendous demands on their time from every direction, to have to take on fair use assessments for all of the works that they're using. Of course, can sometimes be too much, and so you can avoid all of that just by using Creative Commons licensed resources. And there are tons of them. Just in last year, in 2015, they publish the State of the Commons report every year, but last year they reported over 1 billion works licensed under Creative Commons, and about 80% of those have the most permissive Creative Commons license, which is just the requirement up top here that you provide attribution, that you provide some kind of reference or citation to whoever created it, and that if you do that, you can do whatever you want with it. You can share it as widely as you want. You can post it openly online. You can remix it, revise it, all of that. There are some more restrictive Creative Commons licenses. So for instance, the licenses can include these other 3 requirements underneath attribution. They all require attribution, but then they can require also some combination of the other 3. So there's a requirement that you don't change the work, that you don't use it for commercial purposes, which is generally understood not to apply, or in sort of our context here at FSU, being a publicly funded educational institution. And then share alike is kind of like this Trojan horse requirement that if you use it and incorporate it into your course, then you have to license your stuff under the same Creative Commons license that allowed you to use that work. So these combine into a series of 6 licenses. and they're organized here from most free to least free. Again, 80% fall into this most free category of just provide attribution and you can use it, which is a very liberating thing. I mean, it's still copyrighted content, but with a license like this, it really opens it up and frees up the content. It allows you to use it and your students to use and reuse it in whatever the way they might contemplate. And the idea here is really combating some of like that copyright freeze that can go on, where instructors and students just like shy away from using something because it's copyrighted. And I mean, this is really a shame. It impacts the way that instructors teach and the way that students learn and what's possible in our in higher education more generally. So OER and Creative Commons licenses are really trying to work against that. Creating OER and creating Creative Commons licenses to attach to your educational resources or other content is really easy. So this creativecommons.org/choose is like an automated, just asks you a series of questions and then spits out a little image of a Creative Commons badge and even some HTML code that you could throw into your Blackboard course or whatever system you're using to manage and teach your courses. So that's a really easy way to create a Creative Commons license and assign it to your work. Creative Commons also supports, they have this meta search page where you can search across a variety of different platforms that include Creative Commons content, and you'll notice that some of these aren't, it's not just, images, there's media, there's video, there's music, in addition to images as well. So there's really a broad range, a rich pool of content available. If you're more interested in those big search platforms can be useful, but you can also get a lot of noise. So if you want, a more curated list of specific resources, some of which are, subject specific, then I really encourage you to check out this. This is the most comprehensive guide I've found on the topic from the Harvard Law School Library. So they have a bit of an introduction about, what is the public domain, what is Creative Commons, but then they have a series of both public domain and Creative Commons resources for images, for audio, for video. So it's a really, really useful, valuable resource for getting a lay of the land in terms of where you can go to find Creative Commons licensed content. You can do this from Google now. About 2 years ago, I guess, they implemented this usage rights drop-down menu under search tools. So you go to Google Images and click Search Tools, and that top bar, a second bar drops down, and then you have usage rights. And these are all based on Creative Commons license requirements. So reuse, reuse, even including commercial reuse, modification, that kind of thing. Also, just because journal articles are in many disciplines like important educational resources in themselves, that's really one synergy between open educational resources and open access publishing. So open access publishing is free, available to the world, just like open educational resources, and it's been a movement for some time, and many journals have, there's over 10,000 journals that are indexed by the Directory of Open Access Journals, which is what I have up on the screen here. You can browse by subject and filter your search to just English language publications, that kind of thing. And yeah, you can see they have over 2 million articles there that they've indexed. So, there's a wealth of resources here that you can assign that might meet the needs, like your pedagogical needs in designing your course and coming up with your reading list. It may not be necessary for you to, assemble a bunch of articles and prepare a printed course pack for people to purchase, or even necessarily to go to the library and get resources through course reserves. Although that's a great service, it's possible that there might be openly available articles that that you don't need to be affiliated with FSU to have access to. And again, that's going to increase the likelihood that your students can retain the information going forward. I mean, if they're using, purely licensed journal articles, if they don't download a copy, and say 5-6 years down the road after they've left FSU, they remember some research that they did and it would be relevant to what they're currently working on, they won't have access to that content. But if you sign up and access readings, then you can be assured that they will. So we're coming to the end. I just have a couple of slides to talk about some points about where you can get support with respect to open educational resources at FSU. And I just wanted to underline that librarians throughout FSU libraries are available to help with, collaboration on OER adoption and creation. Like we tend to know a fair bit about how to find resources, about copyright and fair use, licensing and permissions, access and dissemination. Those are some areas of expertise that we can bring to bear to help you adopt open educational resources and create them as well. I've included a hyperlink there to the FSU subject librarians list just because we have a number of librarians who are sort of dedicated to providing services to specific colleges, schools, and departments. So that's your go-to resource in terms of finding OER support at the moment. Also, we're planning to launch an OER mini-grant program just at the beginning of next year. And the idea here will be that we'll put out a call for applications from interested instructors who are interested in, adopting open educational resources for their course. So, shifting from maybe that commercial textbook that costs their students $150, $200, each term, to, say, an open textbook, for instance. But I mean, there's any number of other, ways of adopting open educational resources and getting involved in this space. So we'll enumerate some of those, provide, some educational sort of information resources, but also have an application form for interested instructors. And successful applicants would receive about $1,000, $1,000, to help, for instance, cover the cost of a course release so that they would have time to revise their course. So, and throughout the process for people, successful instructors, we would work with you in order to help with resource discovery, copyright review, instructional design, that kind of thing. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure that once it launches, Lindsay will be pushing out information, to ODL and further afield. We're really excited about it, and we look forward to working with all of the great instructors at FSU. And that's all that I have. So I was hoping we could maybe open it up and have some time for questions.
One thing I wanted to add, and because I was in preparation, kind of reading the most recent news about OERs this week, and I read a stat that nearly 40 community colleges throughout the U.S. have made commitments just this year to establish degree programs based solely on OER. And when I go to conferences or talk to librarians from other institutions, it's happening all over the nation. Whether it's just a degree program or there are entire colleges that have said that they're only going to use OERs, they're not going to do textbooks anymore. And in California, the governor just set aside $5 million for OER degree programs. So this isn't just some fringe thing. I really think that it's a movement that's gaining momentum, and the sooner that we can sort of adopt these policies into our own, what we're trying to do for students, I think the better suited Florida State will be to be, the national sort of institution that we want to be.
Yeah, that's all really encouraging, Lindsay. I hadn't heard about the $5 million story from California. I mean, it's heartening to see that our own legislature here in Florida is looking closely at, the affordability of course materials and whatnot, and it's possible that OER could provide a solution to that. and I mean, we'd invite any kind of questioning. It needn't be about, what we've talked about. It could be, comments, thoughts on what instructors really need in order, to move ahead with, say, OER adoption, or, what the library could be doing to help support that.
Of course, if you guys think of any questions later today or anytime in the future, and especially for the people over at the ODL, if you ever have instructors wanting to know more about OERs, you can feel free to contact me or Devin anytime. This is an ongoing initiative, and we're really excited about getting instructors on board, and we want to definitely play a part and be the catalyst for OERs in any way we can. So you can always use us as a resource and look to us in case you have any questions or especially about finding resources too. I mean, Devin is amazing about that, and so always feel like you can reach out to us for anything.
Absolutely.
So this presentation it has been recorded, and we will have it on our YouTube channel, our FSU Libraries YouTube channel, by the end of the week, just in case you wanted to share with other instructors or if you wanted to review any of the information.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming, and I look forward to talking to you more about OERs and hearing from you sometime in the future.